For the first session now, I'd like to give the floor over to Dr. Aisha Chavdar, but before I do that, I'd like to introduce her to you very briefly. She is a journalist and a cultural anthropologist, graduated from journalism department at Ankara University, and she did her master's in history at Boğaziçi University. She worked at various universities and news agencies across Turkey and in European University of Gadrina. She did work on the mütevaziliğin kaybı, ailenin taşınması as the title of her thesis, and she is currently a guest lecturer at Berlin University, and she focuses on conservatism and nationalism in their urban reflections, and more recently she's been working through the narratives of young women who are distanced away from conservatism and doing research on that topic. Professor Ayşe, over to you. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming. Thank you very much for inviting me. I've been refreshed having listened to all of the speakers yesterday. And today's topic will have to do with the public space representation of religious symbols. Two of the speakers today will be talking about how this is represented through women's bodies, and we will be discussing these topics with them. Without further ado, let me give the floor to the first panelist, Professor Dr. İlknur Meşe. Our first panelist will take the floor now, and her paper is entitled From the Headscarf Ban to Freedom from the Headscarf, Reflections on the Direction of Change in Turkey Between Freedom of Belief and Oppression Based on Religion. She graduated from Sociology Department in Süleyman Demirel University. She did her master's in Hacettepe University in the same department, and at the same university she did her PhD in Atatürk Revolutions, and she focused on modernization of Turkey and political identities. She did research on education sociology, feminism, and feminist sociology. And at Giresun University, she works as a lecturer currently. Over to you. Thank you very much.
Benim burada bu sunumda bahsedeceğim konular tam da sizin çalışma alanlarınıza da denk düşüyor. O yüzden de hani sizin de aşinalığınız.
Thank you very much for the floor. I am sure that you're all familiar with the topic. 20 minutes I will have to address a topic that requires a lot of explanation, that usually involves a lot of discussion. So I'll try to summarize my brief with you to the extent possible. I am going to address the issue through Cihan Aktaş, Barbara Solu, and Nazife Şişman, three Islamist writers, and we can call them second-generation Islamist writers. And we will be discussing the headscarf, modernization through Republic, and we are going to look at the analysis, their analysis of fashion and headscarf and modernization, and through their quotes we'll be looking at the liberalization through headscarf, request for liberalization through headscarves, and I'll try to provide you with an interpretation of it. How do Islamist women look at headscarf? According to this increases women's value, individualism, and promotes their participation in production, and it represents women being modest, not being at the forefront through their sexuality, and the rejection of women of an authority over their body. It is a local symbol, she says. It's not a foreign symbol, according to her. However, it's been modernized and it's adopted a new form through time. And the meanings attached to headscarf are quite idealizing. These idealizing definitions call on a subject, and based on that subject, it makes it possible to build an identity. Aktaş and other writers provide a definition with high barriers, very strict boundaries in the form of us and outsiders. It's very clear on that. It is categorizing, non-permeable in their format, and it's also a distinguishing meaning because it serves the function of a differentiating, distinguishing policy. In the Ottoman era, for example, the Muslim way of dressing segregated non-Muslims from Muslims, and compared to other women living in urban areas, and compared to women who had headscarves but was not dressed modestly according to their understanding, were distinguished as well. And through time, this will evolve into we are like you, you are like us, and we're not different. And this will be ensured through a secularist language. And the authors have also preserved their distant approach, look at that type of language. And distinction of Muslim women in urban areas, and they use such statements. Women who are dressing as men, according to Barbara Solu's definition. That provides high barriers as well. A conservative family who migrated from village to the city will have to differentiate themselves, distinguish themselves from the rest of the city dwellers. They will have to be unlike the others, so they'll have to wear headscarves and dress modestly. And there's a difference between Nazife Şişman and Barbara Solu. Nazife Şişman interviews Barbara Solu, and whenever there's the following discussion, whenever headscarf is perceived to be worn through the pressure of patriarchal members of the family, whenever there is such an implication, Nazife Şişman immediately intervenes, saying that, no, it's not like that. She warns the interviewee. And they have in their books covered some limiting information, pieces of information, and they disregard completely other complementary pieces of information, and that leads to certain gaps in the way they handle the address the subject, and disregard the patriarchal pressures, the male pressures entirely, and these disregards are reflected in their books in the following way. They adopt wearing a headscarf as a phenomenon that is adopted by women naturally in various blogs, and in blogs entitled "You Will Never Walk Alone." The young women who'd like to be liberated from headscarves are pressurized by their elder brothers or religious, pious fathers. And this pressure that has been disregarded in their books, in their writings, are very obvious, and these pressures are being voiced more and more. Cultural, ontological, religious, and pedagogical meanings are attached to headscarf by these writers, authors, and they describe headscarf as such a symbol. And Barbara Sol does not describe it, define it as a pedagogical one, a pedagogical symbol, but that's how I interpret her definitions. And she says that headscarf has an internal function, a disciplinary function for the person wearing it, and that's why headscarf is an important figure in their world. And there's also the following fact: in their narratives, a careful pair of eyes can see a number of gaps. Through their books, actually, they give a few messages to the pious sections of the society. They give them a narrative of history, an idealized women with modest clothing, describing this phenomenon as a fact, and they're claiming that they're giving the message that we're not these ignorant and dumb women that are wearing headscarves and dressing modestly simply because of the pressures of the elder family members, male family members. And they remind us of the fact that modest dressing is something that is done willingly, and they categorize other women, a group as other women, as opposed to a woman dressing modestly, and this is hierarchical and sustainable according to them. And based on this categorization of women, again, within the system, consumer, empty women, traditional women, Muslim ideal women definitions abound, and we have Muslim enlightened women definition, for example. We have a number of approaches that accompany it. For example, as per the nature of Muslim women, they start their sentences, they question, they criticize, they're modern, but they have a conventional, traditional sides as well. There are archetypes that can be seen in the history. They build a family. They do not blindly obey their husbands, but motherhood is sacred. So they describe modernist side of Muslim women as well as an archetypal historical portrayal of Muslim enlightened women. They idealize Muslim enlightened women through such definitions. This idealizing definitions are putting a lot of suspicion on other definitions of Muslim women. When we link this to nature and describe it something that does not change, different forms of womanhood are perceived as non-fitting for the religion, and it affects everyone. It affects women dressing modestly. These women can also be accused of not abiding by the requirements of the religion, but that women wearing a headscarf is going to those entertainment places, and these women can also be assessed as not fitting for the with the religious requirements. And if they were to make more flexible definitions to cover other forms of states of piousness, it would be more inclusive. And we have naturally concluded that they have pious women model, and that is non-pious, another one that is non-pious women. And they also create a symbol of women that migrated from village to the city that is not fitting with the model they have in mind, and that does not reflect the ontological state. This modest dressing should be accompanied by a set of behaviors, and that should create the impression in the person. And they say that if the woman is wearing a skirt with a headscarf, that does not give out the same message, create the same image. I am going through quite quickly through these definitions to the whole picture, but I'll try to give you a summary at the end. Through modernization of the Republic, the religion is perceived to have been weakened, and religious aspects from the public space has been raised, and they even go further by interpreting it as Islamophobia, and they minimize the entire modernization to modernization of wardrobe. I'm not providing any judgment, but just giving you a brief of how they perceive things. This modernization has not started with the Republic, actually. It started with the later periods of Tanzimat in Ottoman era. And what I claim is that the Republic has erased religion completely, whereas in the late Ottoman periods, it was still within the boundaries of Islam, and they created exiles in their own country, as a famous poet said. Aktaş, Barbarosoğlu, and Shishman define women with modest dressing, women wearing headscarves, that would be perceived as not coinciding with or reconciling with Western values, for example. But as of today, we see these values being reconciled with a lot of Western values as well. And the criticism they put on the Republican modernization have proved to have reconciled with a lot of things that they describe as non-reconcilable. And they do not provide a lot of criticism on that front. And in the face of the Republican modernization, they say that the religion will take a step back, but in 80s and 90s, young women wearing headscarves were at the gates of universities, and secularists were calling this as a new occurrence, but there was a 1,000-year long tradition, which meant that headscarf existed in these lands. That was a culture that already existed, and throughout history, women wore headscarves, and that's their background, on the basis of which they say that these women are not newly emerging, they're the direct products of these lands. But in a way, this 1,000-year-old tradition is not the only basis. There are a lot of other influences, I believe. According to Aktaş, we also see that this is a new occurrence, new emergence. There's a traditional side, but it's also modernist, but it's trying to overcome both the new, the modern, the Western, and they're reinterpreting the headscarf, trying to create new phenomenon. This is, on the one hand, a new phenomenon, as we can observe. But up until that point, up until the point where the Republican modernism became prevalent in the public space and religion became unlivable, according to their description, they say that the religion was lived, experienced in public spaces, referring to the religious communities and associations where religion was experienced and lived through below the public space, visible public space. And until 80s, 90s, they say that Republican public space was avoided, consciously avoided, and there was a distant stance. For example, the pious section of the society did not send off their girls to secular schools. They stayed distant, and they didn't want their boys to go into public service because the public service represented modern life in the Republican era. And that distance was not exactly as they described. There are certain gaps in this piece of information as well, and they meticulously stayed away from the following facts. Pious fathers were not interested in sending their girls to schools, and the resulting picture is that girls went to Quran courses and boys went to imam priest schools, and that's what's revealed through their writings. And in the background of this, there was a conscious and intentional staying away from this, and the mentality, the mindset of not sending girls to school did not change. We have to see the implications of that, but they are refraining from saying it out loud. In later years, in 50s, the scene has changed, they say, with the Democrat Party coming into power. In 60s, they organized conferences, making a change, a transformation real. And in 80s and 70s, Muslim women were more visible in social life. And because they became too visible, headscarf bans came into being.
Osmanlı'dan beri ılımlı batıcıların, ılımlı milliyetçilerin ve İslamcıların tartıştığı Müslüman kalarak modernleşelimle Cumhuriyet modernleşmesini ifade eden gardrop modernleşmesinin.
And since early republic, the wardrobe modernism conflict has its basis on the conflict around a headscarf, and they also believe that such attention has also caused this ban on headscarf, which results in a certain typology as defined by Aktaş. These girls who are standing at the entrance of universities demanding for their right to education with headscarves. So this is the typology Aktaş defined, and indeed Aktaş romanticizes this. There is a sense of identity attributed to them, and this is their organic and genuine response, making their existence more meaningful. So they were seeking such an identity against this artificial identity that they were against. So they were indeed revolutionary, enlightened, and peaceful. This is how Aktaş defined. Of course, we cannot deny these peculiarities, these threats, but this was not the entire story, I have to say. So the headscarf ban has created a certain political awareness, as they acknowledge it themselves. And it's also acknowledged by Aktaş, and they do not always use certain terms. So there was a secular language created among Islamist communities, Islamic circles, and they were also in touch with a feminist movement. So Baybarasoğlu Şişman believed that building a relationship with the Western values would be problematic, and they say that science is some sort of a requirement, because up until that moment, the public sphere in the Republican era does not accept women with headscarf in this era. And the headscarf ban, considering the context of women's movement, might also be construed as discrimination against women. And this was described as some sort of imperative, because it was not possible at that time to impose this with the rules in the Quran or with the Islamic jurisprudence. That's why they had to make such an argument. And they also consider feminism as the Trojan horse, as the believer women joins the feminist circles, because if they do so, they will then transform men as well. Even though they will not be at the center of the public sphere, at least they would not be excluded. And since they would have built relations with feminism and the feminism movement, this will be transforming them too. And this is how they define the Islamist feminist or feminist women. We are out of time, so if you can wrap up, we will be very pleased. I'm well aware that there are some points that you wanted to cover and you couldn't cover. Oh, well, I would like to also further mention that there were some issues about modernization too, but to sum up, we used to have a very rigid categorization earlier, but our present-day life does not really reflect all these rigid categorizations. It is not really possible to continue them. For instance, for the women pursuing Islam, they cannot only remain in the backyard, and they are transforming as well. They are questioning life, they are criticizing the government, and they have more affirmative stance towards the gender roles, and they also elevate the values of feminism. And during the Justice and Development Party rule, they abolished the ban on headscarf. However, during the same time, all these women pursuing Islam, they also raised more demands about their women's rights. That includes the Istanbul Convention and discussions around theism. And also, they offered different responses to the Islamization strategy. So there are some intersecting or cross-cutting examples that we have seen recently. So this backyard, this garden is changing. We cannot really hold it tight. Life is changing. So perhaps some political pressures have been eliminated, but the patriarchal pressure continues. What has also changed is that these headscarf women owe some sort of gratitude to the politicians for abolishing or removing the ban on headscarf. And I think these are the other topics that we should continue discussing, particularly when these women can now work in public offices. Thank you very much, Professor, for this very detailed assessment so around these cases or stories of 3 women. While I was reading your paper, it occurred to me that these texts should be written in the light of certain political circumstances or certain political periods. And all this change, transformation, we would see it. I mean, I'm not talking about self-reflective, but reflective characters. So something happens, then there's a change. Particularly Barbara Solo. I remember what Barbara Solo said before 2013. Well, at that time, they could easily collaborate with the feminists back then, because they said, we will not give you a vote, we will not cast a vote for you if you do not show any headscarf women as political nominees. So the discourse has changed after 2013. And as part of my current study, there is this patriarchal bargain as defined by some scholars that I'm currently studying. So I think there is also some sort of patriarchal negotiation, meaning a negotiation within the patriarchy. So women do not only negotiate with the patriarchs, but patriarchs themselves, including the man as the leader of the household and others. They are also negotiating with others. So women is trying to open up a space or carve out a space for herself in all these circumstances. This being the case, we women need to both open up a space, carve out a space, find out a niche, but also to make sense out of this experience, to attribute a certain meaning to it, perhaps a pedagogical leadership or some sort of an identity, or sparking a debate beyond the headscarf. Because there is also a certain difference between the first generation and the second generation, but now the current generation is struggling on multiple fronts. becoming a pedagogical authority. Exactly, Cihan Aktaş, this is for Cihan Aktaş, this is the case, and for Nazife, it's a bit different. This is also due to their educational background. I forgot the surname of Yıldız Ramazanoğlu. I just forgot her surname, and Sibel Eraslan. So if we put together all these scholars, then we can see a completely different picture. And of course, we can also see what happens background. In the background, they are friends. And also, if you include Hidayet Tuksal in this picture, you will yet again see a brand new perspective. Also, Merin Hanım and Hidayet Hanım, yes, I mean, they are really the pioneers here. But what they miss, what they somewhat neglect is as follows. By the way, I was wearing a headscarf myself in the past. So there is this struggle on the part of the headscarf women to get out of their home, to get out of their houses, so that they are out on the streets. So there is the authority of the neighborhood and there is the authority of the patriarchs, but there is also another authority within the home. So getting out of the house, getting out of the neighborhood or leaving the neighborhood, these are all important struggle areas for headscarf women. I mean, when I say get out of home, meaning leaving home in a way not to return, but this is not the case for this current generation. We also see this in the case of Halime. She talks about a woman without a headscarf, and she tries to define this woman. So this is indeed a fiction work. This is a novel. Coming back to this negotiation within the patriarchy, there needs to be a negotiation so that she would win the support of the father. But at the same time, the secular public sphere is something desirable for her. So she wants to be involved in the secular public sphere, but then she has her comfort zone at home. So these are all different parameters of negotiation for her. When I listen to your paper as well as papers by all other scholars, I come to realize that there is more room for discussion because all these accusations are two-sided, and I'm not only referring to the history of headscarf, but to the history of the Republic, the history of modernization, because there is a process of secularizing on the one hand, and also centralizing on the other hand. I'm not only talking about a forced exclusion, by the way, because the state has a toolbox, a legislative toolbox. But I think this is particularly important in the light of these women who are making this struggle to get out of their homes. And I believe it's very good news that there may be a secularizing moment in this post-religious era. So I think we will need to see more cues about its origins and its signs. So thank you so much once again for your intervention. Let us proceed to our second panelist, Professor Adelaide Madera, and her paper is entitled Headscarves at the Crossroads Between Plural Narratives, Where is Turkey Moving Forward? Adelaide Madera completed her PhD in Ecclesiastical Law and Canon Law. She is a full professor at the Department of Law at the University of Messina, Italy. Her research focuses on interrelationship between law and religion, particularly church-state relationship. Over to you, Professor.
Thank you so much. Thank you for giving me the floor. I would like to thank all the organizers of this challenging meeting. Now I will try to share my screen to begin my presentation. Okay. One moment, please. Okay. I hope you can you see it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I will speak about headscarves at the crossroads between plural narratives. And I will start from a recent judgment of the European Court of Justice, where the Court of Justice held that a ban on employees wearing visible political, philosophical, or religious signs in the workplace does not amount to direct discrimination under European Union law. And the Turkish government condemned such a ruling as an expression of European Islamophobia. However, the debate about the headscarf, I was saying that in a recent judgment, the European Court of Justice held that a ban on employees wearing visible political, philosophical, or religious signs in the workplace does not amount to direct discrimination. The Turkish government condemned such a ruling as an expression of European Islamophobia. However, the issue of the headscarf in the Turkish context is more complex than that, because we can, according to some scholars, the issue of the Islamic headscarf can be considered as the anchor point in the examination of gender issues, the separation of church and state, and the relationship of Turkey and European Union. It shows how gender, nationalism, and religion can intersect in complex ways. As is known, the headscarf issue is extremely relevant in the European landscape, as it revolves around the question of public visibility of religion in the public space, and it emphasizes European states' diversity in managing pluralism. However, we can speak about Turkish exceptionalism, which is due to an extremely controversial nature of the symbol, regardless of the status of Islam as a majority religion in the Turkish context. Indeed, Islamic headscarf has given rise to a polarized political debate, where the construction of its meaning has acquired a strong political connotation. Both the Kemalist secularism and conservative Islam took advantage of such a symbol to define female identity, with a view to serving alternative models of nationalism. So we see two competing narratives. On one hand, covering is an act of an individual choice. It is based on a religious belief. It is an aspect of religious freedom that should be guaranteed in a democratic, pluralist, and liberal system. But according to another view, veiling mirrors the symbolic expression of a power the religious Islamic fundamentalist one, which is subversive of the secular state regime, whose influence must be eliminated as it is in contradiction with the principles promoted by the Republic, and in particular with the state view relating to the recognition of women's freedom. So we see this polarization in Pamuk's novel Snow, where we see a really critical approach toward the Turkish secularism and the polarization between the two opposite views, Turkey as a secular state or as a theocracy. So the ban as a symbol of gender equality, or the ban as a violation of religious freedom. Such a novel seems an expression of three microcosms, the three K: car, cars, and ka. Snow, car in Turkish, the snow that isolates the town during the events, and it symbolizes the crystallization of the status of stagnation of a context which is split between tradition and modernity, between religious and secular values. Ka is the main character of the novel, and he's in charge of writing a report on the municipal elections in the town, although he tries to play a role of mediation between the opposing factions. And he comes up against some situations, strange situations, and he meets the distrust of both sides, who accuse him of a confused and utopian liberalism or passive subjection to Western values, disrespectful of God and religion. Kars is an imaginary Turkish town where the novel is set. It's at the center of conflictual dynamics because of the frail coexistence between individuals of various religious, political, or cultural affiliations. So the Islamic headscarf seems the fil rouge of the novel, the common thread of the novel. The Pamuk writes about the suicide of several young women as victims of family and state pressure. According to his words, women's suicide entered daily life without warning, without any ceremony, in a completely unexpected way. And then one of the main characters of the novel, Teslim, one of the girls who committed the suicide, according to the author words, despite the pressure of her parents, refused to take off her veil. So she was no longer admitted to school. She was about to be expelled for too many absences. Seeing that some of her friends had given up resistance and removed the headscarf, or that some were wearing wigs, she began to tell her father and friends that nothing in life made sense and that she didn't want to live anymore. And we cannot underestimate, we cannot forget the rector of a school. I'm speaking about the novel, director of a school who was injured as he prohibiting women to attend classes if they did not remove their headscarf. So emblematic is the dialogue between him and Blue, who is an Islamic fundamentalist. How can you reconcile the will of Allah with not accepting them in class? Not letting girls with their heads covered enter the classroom in the school is a provision of our secular state. Sorry, can I ask you a question? Are the provisions of the state superior to those of Allah, Professor? That's a good question, but these are different things in a secular state. So the absence of dialogue between these two conflicting narratives. And then the tragedy in Cars, a show inspired by Thomas Kyd's Spanish tragedy that shows the comparison between the political position, the first character of the tragedy, inspired by Westernism and Kemalism, according to which the act of unveiling symbolizes the achievement of independence of women, the same way as the European ones, and that of Cadiz, which was the main actress, who threatens to hang herself on stage after uncovering her head, demonstrating that women forced to give up their veil would kill themselves for pride. And actually, a tragedy in Cars ends in tragedy, a Cadiz's involuntary killed Sanai. So we can see a critical approach toward the two opposite narratives. Pamuk as a critical approach toward the promoters of assertive secularism, in Professor Kuru words, that have long features the Turkish context, but who were lacking a solid philosophical cultural basis, according to the author, and also manifested a prejudicial defensive approach toward the cultural and religious values. But Pamuk's approach is critical also toward the affiliation to Islamic fundamentalism of some characters, Blue, Mahdar, as it was the result of disappointment toward the Western ideals, or as a result of existential doubts. So the main character is also a fundamental, as a key role in the novel, as he shows the tension experienced in Turkish society since the late 19th century, in his effort to test the limits of one's own identity and to trace form of negotiation between different cultures, tendencies, religions, and stories. So Pamuk stresses the idea of the other, the risk inherent in every form of radicalism, while offering a view of an atypical Islam, more marked by critical individualism. The character I'm speaking about, Blue, the one of the main character, the Islamic terrorist, to intellectual skepticism, to political non-conformism. So in Pamuk's perception, this will be more coherent, more appropriate than secularism to promote the process of modernization in Turkey, are more consistent with the historical social reality of the country. So such a view mirrors Pamuk's perception of the Islamic headscarf. Women wish not to wear a headscarf as a result of form of family or social pressure, but as an affirmation of identity, of their religious and cultural affiliation. So Pamuk novels mirrors competing narratives of secularism in Turkey. On one hand, assertive secularism, on the other hand, liberal secularism. So assertive secularism is considered as connected with the Kemalism, where the idea of secularism was considered as the bastion of a democratic society, and secularism was also deemed as a sort of philosophy of life, influencing all aspects of life: social life, education, family, economy. And this form of assertive secularism was connected with the exclusion of religious symbolism from public space. However, many commentators underlined that this idea of secularism failed, this model of state failed in overcoming completely the patriarchal social structures deriving from the Ottoman tradition. Also, the enforcement of the Headscarf Ban did not occur under the Ataturk regime, but later were under a regulation of 1962, and also were during the 80s, when there had been a strong politicization of the issue of the headscarf. Some panelists who are more experts than me about Turkish history already have spoken about the February coup d'etat in Turkey. So when the idea of neutralization of public space began more assertive. And as we know, the Islamic headscarf arrived before the European Court of Human Rights in the infamous case Leyla Sahin versus Turkey, where some negative aspects of this idea of secularism have been, upheld by the European Court of Human Rights. So assertive secularism as a secularism of appearance that implies neutralization of the public space, regardless any consideration about the proportionality of the ban. I mean, in this case, I'm speaking about this case because the ban on Islamic headscarf in Turkey involved not only
Professor Madera, you have 3 minutes more. That's
okay. Do you not imply only public servants, but also students at university? So we have an over-expansion of this idea of a sort of passive proselytism that comes from the wearing of a headscarf. During the ATP government, we have another use of the headscarf. A use to an exploitation of the symbol to promote another nationalist approach. So headscarf has been seen as a symbol of oppression of the devout Muslims. So on one hand, we had a relaxation on the ban, but on the other hand, we can wonder if the AKP regime effectively moved forward the democratization and pluralism. So I have no longer, I can no longer speak about all these aspects, but we should consider also we are giving a global view of the of this regime. We should speak about asymmetric treatment of religious minorities, increasing role of the Minister of Religious Affairs, negative implications on gender issues, and also the idea, there is also attention because the idea of the headscarf is promoted to the detriment of the others. So there is also this idea of the need of otherization of people who do not share the same views. So we have two different political models who share some negative aspects: a political use of Islam, identification of the headscarf with a governmental nationalistic message, political actors who alter the religious meaning of the message, so giving rise to a sort of weakening of the genuine religious message. So in both cases, an imposition of a gender uniformity, so little room for female autonomy. So the real need, I'm sorry, this slide is not completely visible because we have to reflect about the need in Turkey. There is a strong need to move beyond paternalistic approach toward the gender policies and to develop new strategies to implement female autonomy through social integration, as access to essential services, to the workplace, while respecting identity, religious, cultural identity of every woman. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Türkçe devam edeceğim yoruma. Biraz hazırladığım
I will
şeylerden...
continue in English because I've received a paper that was slightly different from what I received in writing. What I've read was heavily influenced by law, but I've seen a presentation that was really centered around Orhan Pamuk. And I believe that this is my least favorite novel of his, and he's created a really meta sphere that was far removed from Kemalist or Islamist alternatives, and that's from a top that he speaks in his novel describing the situation in Turkey. And he's not been interfered that much as women with whose bodies people are interfered quite a lot, and he's proposed a solution in his own way, removing the debate from both alternatives. And we're talking about the period up until 2010 of AKP government, who used this as a strategy to redefine modernization, and we have to rediscuss this. And we have an experience in our hands now, because towards the end of the 90s, all of the other ideological alternatives had been used up and had failed. And in such an environment, they emerged as a last resort, if you like. And the emergence of AKP, starting from the story of Headscarf, was not let's give the whole state, the whole government to the pious people and let them rearrange our public sphere entirely. That wasn't the way they emerged. And at the beginning, from the point of view of Orhan Pamuk's framework, AKP was claiming that we've changed, we've transformed, and we're ready to transform the Islamists and make them more modernized, more democratic, and more along the lines of owning the republic. But then we're not at that point now, and the last resort Orhan Pamuk had recommended, had suggested, has been used up. It's failed now. And as a moderator, I'd like to express my admiration for all of the panelists and the moderators before me. Secularism principle of the Republic and the pious principles of Islam had mutually excluded one another, and all of the papers had looked at, have addressed this issue from different viewpoints. And in this novel, we have this confrontation, if you like, or polarization between the two sides. And women were defined as a boundary, as a border between the two. And the novel was a very good example, which was described in this paper. And I do not agree with his the historical approach of the writer. If we think of secularism as a standalone philosophy and secularism as a view of the world, as a lifestyle, I think the problem that is presented in these papers can be resolved to a certain extent, because the government cannot be expected to be liberal. We cannot expect the state to be liberal. They'll make laws, they'll impose laws, they regulate day-to-day lives of citizens, and we will have to be constantly negotiating how they do all of these things. And this is a never-ending process. It will go on forever, and the moment it ends, I think we'll have a dystopia becoming a reality. And the ideal is that it never ends, this cycle. But secularity, taken as a separate phenomenon from secularism, not only liberal seculars, but the pious people will be distinguished from one another, and we will understand how they interact with others. And we will understand how the pious people negotiate with the state, with the government, with the law. And we can set aside their differences with the government and we can see how these differences are softened. And there's actually another negotiation going on within the society. And the autonomy of women, as you described, Professor, in the female movement, touches upon feminism, headscarf, and secularism. And it brings together different parties, convincing one another, changing one another's ideas and views. And even if they don't convince one another, they gain this autonomy by standing side by side. And from the viewpoint of secular state and Islamism, women represent a symbol, women's body represent a symbol and turn into a sphere in and of itself. And that's why this struggle, this clash takes place on the basis of this space, which empowers women tremendously. This is a tremendous power that is given over to women, if you like, but your body turns into a wall, a war scene, if you like, and it makes you frail, it makes you vulnerable as well at the same time. And the same thing applies to the discussions around abortion, not only discussions around headscarves. And another legal story narrative can be created along those lines as well. I thank you very much for your presentation, and moving on to the next panelist from Özgün Kehya. She's going to be talking to us about their Hodscha und die Piepenkötter, women as subjects of change. In that work, a change at the intersection of gender, post-migration and religion. Özgün Kehya graduated from Kafkas University and Anadolu University Cinema and cinema department. She works as a researcher there, and she is specialized in hate speech in media works. In 2020-2021, she did a research on migration and society, and she also filmed a documentary. Over to you.
Ayşe Hocam, teşekkür ederim sunumunuz için. Beni rahatlıkla duyabiliyorsunuz sanırım.
Good morning, good afternoon, Ayşe Hocam. I hope you can hear me clearly. I have prepared my presentation in English, so I would like to continue in English too.
Sorry. This is a German-Turkish film, and this is called the Hodscha on the Piepenkötter. I'm searching for this film for the heterogeneous representations in the film in the intersection of gender, post-migration, and religion. And can we see a change in the filmic representations of a German-Turkish film? So here, please can you open my presentation? I think Yamo is, yeah. The second slide, please. Can you skip? Okay, thank you. Here, my keywords are post-migrant and gender, religion, representation, German and Turkish film. And this film can be categorized as ethno-comedy, culture clash, or integration comedy in Germany. And the film's director is Buket Alakuş. It's a film directed in 2016. And Buket Alakuş is an important name in Turkish-German cinema or German-Turkish cinema. Here, can you skip the third presentation, please? Because gender and religion are among the themes represented in German-Turkish post-migrant films, because about a quota of the population has a migration background, and the largest minority religion is Islam, because after 1960s, with the Turkish-German labor migration, the number of Muslims has increased, and thus Turkey administers part of the Islamic religion affairs in Germany. And of course, religious issues like Muslim practices, holy places, gender equality, and hijabi women in the public sphere are sometimes also covered in the media and films. And in these films, especially, I focus on, we can see some perspectives built on prejudice and stereotypes at the intersection of religion, migration, and gender. And however, in particular cases, we can escape from such prejudice and stereotypes. With such depictions, filmmakers can aim, can have specific goals, such as reflecting reality and diversity, or construction and idealized reality. In this study, I focused on the representation, heterogeneous representations of the characters in Buket Alakuş's Der Hodscha on the Piepenkötter in terms of gender and religion. Because in this film, we can see women who are playing a role in gaining some religious rights in the film. And with this film, we can see some deconstructions about gender stereotypes. And they can be, religious people can be reflected heterogeneous like the other people. And of course, to support my this argument, we should compare the before the German-Turkish films about migration in the film literature. Please, can you skip to the fourth presentation slide? Thank you. As I said, after 1960s, with the increase of the Muslim population in Germany, the demand for new masks causes debates, because at the first times they start the Muslim community start to pray in empty buildings or empty factory spaces or backyard mosques, and it's a very German term. It's called Hinterhof Meşe, and we can call it in English backyard mosques, and they are still flats, we can see in Germany. However, in some big cities like in Duisburg or Köln, we can see some detailed mosques with proper mosque architecture. And this demand for new mosque has caused many times some debates, and this film is related to this debate, and the acts of the film is the conflict of the film is built in a new mosque in a comic language. And please, can you skip the fifth presentation slide? In this film, I will focus on the characters, mostly in terms of film. And in this film, we can see more heterogeneous characters when we compare the previous German-Turkish films or the Turkish Yeşilçam films, for example. I think this is important. And we see some women are more powerful in this film, and this is important when we look at the socio-cultural studies, because women are very important also in migration process, because they promote the development of peaceful relationships, the dismantling of macho culture, and the transformation of society. However, even migrant women are very powerful, and they have social cultural roles in promoting society. We haven't seen this representation so much, and we saw most of the times with their patriarchal victims. It was at the focus. However, after 2000, we see Turkish-German screen power, as Yeşilada calls this situation. We see new and more positive image of integrated women migrants on the screen, or people with migration background, we can call. And Buket Alakuş, the director of the Hodscha and the Piepenkötter, is a member of the National Integration Plan in Germany, which is signed in 2007. And because of her role in the integration plan, she reflects her role in her films. Can we pass the sixth slide, please? Before analyzing the film, I want to talk about religion in the media and integration films. I wanted to compare the German ones with the Turkish Yeşilçam perspectives, because I want to give some polycentric approach to this presentation, because we see we often see Orientalist views, and we see some stereotypes for or against the headscarf, or for or against forced marriage, and some very social important phenomena are also important for building this produce. For example, September 2001 attacks. However, after the Turkish-German Scream Power, after the 2000s, we start to see more heterogeneous religious and clerical representations, for example. And I want to give Umut Aladağ's film Das Deutsche Kind, 2017, and 8 Sekunden, which is a Turkish-German co-production, and Mevsim Çiçek Açtı, which is a Turkish film about German migration. I also want to mention about the Turkish films, because we see also some religious representations in Turkish films or series, and according to the time and history or political situation, these representations can also change. For example, they can portray clerics, especially imams, as modern imams, role model imams. Some studies, I'm talking about some studies, and along with such images, also we see negative portrayals of the imams. I talk about Turkish films, and now I want to start the Hodscha and the Piepenkötter story and analysis. 1 second, please. Elif, bunun şarjı azalıyor. This film is shot in North Rhine-Westphalia in Germany, in Lothringen, and which is very dominated by Turkish Turks there. And the main conflict in the film is to build a mosque in the city or not. So, can you please pass the 7th slide? And of course, we see some people who want the construction of the mosque, and there are other people who try to hinder the construction of mosque. So we can call this film in the genre. Please, can you pass the 7th slide? Thank you. In this film, Turkish community in Lothringen has been eager for a long time to build a new mosque, a proper mosque, and the construction plan is about to finalize. And a religious cleric from Turkey called Nuri Hoca, who is the protagonist of the film, returns from Turkey. He is appointed by Turkish state to finalize the construction of these mosques. However, there are some political elections, and this turns to a political debate, and the current mayor, who is called Mayor Özgün Piepenkötter, she is also in charge of these religious affairs and faces opposition from her political party. And because to be re-elected again as a mayor, she start to try to prevent the construction of the mosque, in her party, there are some opposites. For example, Dr. Schad, he is strictly against, and he got the support from the right wing of his party and people with Islamophobia, and he started to have a cooperation with also radical Muslim people in Lothringen. So at the end of the film, the construction plan is approved, but after some debates, after some interacts, and then now I want to talk about heterogeneous religious Muslims in this film. Here, Nuri Hoca, Hülya, his daughter Hülya, Patrick, and Çiçek commit to the happy ending of the film. And Nuri Hoca is a very energetic, enlightened, and determined person. He supports his daughter Hülya in her education, and she plays also bağlama, Turkish guitar, and she has a friendship with Patrick. Hülya is also his daughter. He's an integrated character and has a self-confidence in public spheres, for example. And I want to talk about, please, the 9th slides. Also, Çiçek. She is a hijabi woman, and we see a Muslim woman. She is the wife of Osman, and normally veils her face. But at the end of the film, we see her transformation from her invisibility to visibility, like from non-existence to existence. And we can make a parallel comparison, like invisible masks to visible masks. And here, her ability to use modern technology helps to construct mask building, because she is at the first she was invisible, but she was very good at using modern technology, and she hindered her husband's tricks, and she committed to the happy ending of the film. Please, the 10th slide. Okay. Also here, as negative characters, we see right-wing populist Christians and radical Muslims, because they join forces for their political interests. And the primary axis of conflict emerges from shortened political interests of some political leaders, and also they provoke a concern with people with Islamophobia. And on the other hand, we see also radical Muslim Osman has political interest, because he wants to be the old mosque administrator. Please, the 11th slide. And also, I want to talk about the agents of negotiation. Here we see Hülya and Patrick. Hülya is the daughter of the Hodscha, and Patrick is son of the mayor, Piepenkötter. And in a scene, they play music together. One is playing Turkish guitar, bağlama, and Patrick plays guitar, and they compose music together. And in one scene, Hodscha and the mayor are jumping on the trombone, and the EU flag waving behind them. And they are like children. And these are the elements of negotiation, like a third space of Bafa. And Ursula Piepenkötter is like as a mediator. She's like a gray color. Then at the first she tries to hinder the mosque construction for her political interests. However, at the end of the film, we see a transformation. And the Patrick, also Hülya, they are teenagers, and their role is far behind the political interests as well.
Özgün hocam, son 2,5 dakika.
Aha, tamam hocam, bitirmek üzereyim.
Ne güzel.
Please, the last slide. 12. Can you pass this 12th slide? but okay, I can talk. Here we see a happy end at the film. The mayor Ursula Piepenkötter has the role of mediator by building a bridge between the Christians and Muslims, and in a panel discussion, she provides an approval of new mosque construction. And Osman's wife Çiçek has a role in overcoming ugly intrigues. And at the end of the film, the fraud in which right-wing populist Christians and radical Muslims join forces comes under the spotlight. And Hülya and Patrick, the teenage characters, embrace, and we can notice that dialogue continues when Hodscha calls Piepenkötter. And as a result, we can say that this film can have a potential to deconstruct the old stereotypes through the heterogeneous representations between good and evil characters. We can again think, because this is also comic film, so this is important, and maybe it can lead to think about that minorities, also the majorities, are can be heterogeneous, and we can think about again the stereotypes and question of the role of women in peaceful relations in society. Thank you for listening me.
Sayenizde haberdar olmuş oldum bu filmden. O yüzden ayrıca
I've been informed of the existence of this film thanks to you. Thank you very much for that as well. I will make sure that I see it, I watch it from beginning to end as soon as possible. I'm not going to be able to talk at length about your presentation because I haven't seen the film, but I will make a few comments about cliches, about stereotypes. I haven't seen the film, as I said, but I will find and see it. And I've checked the online resources, and I haven't seen a link where I could see the film, but I will recheck. By definition, cliches are not that bad to me. That maybe because I'm a journalist and I've worked with documentaries, I've supported script writing of certain films. I believe that cliches sometimes provide us with a backbone, and they can lead the way to help us narrate a story. And it's not possible to really talk about these deviations if you don't have a backbone that is a cliche. We have to have these stereotypes so that we can slap them on the face, we can deconstruct them, we can paint them, we can put them in the mud and clean them up again. So I don't think cliches are bad by definition. And more importantly, I think from a post-colonial theory, a lot of colleagues act as if they do not exist. I get mixed up with the surnames these days, but I've seen a video of Lugod, and in Western novel, were described based on genital mutilation and honor killings, and that was the basis for on which women were described in many Western novels. And the fact that these novels are solely obsessed on these issues does not necessarily mean that these phenomena do not exist, but we can also narrate these stories without fighting with these phenomena. We'll have this fighting in the background while producing cultural works. I'm not sure how we can come out of it without actually fighting. And in about 2 decades ago, I would say that these cliches are being reproduced time and again. But these phenomena, these problems exist, and even if we say that these novels do not represent them truly. They still exist. And it's not about these stories being narrated elsewhere or on the outside. The problems do exist in situ as well. And I've grown to adopt this view as I've listened to the stories of headscarved women. We used to fight them. We would tell that this is not because of the pressures, because it's due to other factors. And for the past couple of years, I've been listening to a story in which the phenomenon took place simply because of the pressures, and you have to really struggle with it and fight with it. You've introduced to us a very beautiful movie, a beautiful film. Thank you for that, and I'm sure I'll enjoy it. We'll all enjoy it a lot. And it's they're reproducing a cliche of peace, in a way, because if it was a different type of movie and not a comedy, I think the Hodscha with other Islamists and the mayor with the local Christians there, or with AFD, there'll be another set of fights, and I think it would no longer be a comedy but a tragedy. And I've lived in Germany for the past 6 years, and at the end of the day, they're telling a story that would easily be told by the Greens, I believe. It's that sort of cliche, I think. Thank you very much for giving us some extra time. We have another set of 5 minutes. I'm looking at the panelists, if they've already read the questions. If you have, then I'll give the floor to you immediately, not reading out loud all of the questions. Aisha, I don't think we can see the questions. On the bottom of your screen, you should have a icon that says Q&A, a tab that says a Q&A, but I think you haven't read the questions. I'll sum up the questions for you then. From Betül, Professor Betül, we have a question. So I'm summing up the question. After 2000s, I've noticed there might be some sort of withdrawal in the Islamist circles, and this withdrawal might have given room to a certain possibility, a certain flexibility or relaxation for different states of womanhood. So Islamist women, headscarved women authors have adopted a narrative that gives more space to different states of womanhood. And here's another comment. Authors' language seems to be a language of reaction and victimization. They might have a point as well, she says. So that's one comment. A number of thanks to the panelists. Here is an important question from Pınar Melisya Salıparmaksız. We have modern yet pious women in the Kemalist period, and we have the Islamist pious and modest women. Isn't there a continuation between the two? I think they feed one another. They really complement one another. At least that's my view. Religious approach towards a pious way of living and a headscarf. Could there be a new form for it? There's another question. Religion is not even a motivation for wearing headscarves. I can tell you hundreds of motivations. Girls wanting to grow up, becoming adults, and in very conservative, very conservative families, a motivation, important motivation for girls to wear headscarves is to be able to get out of the home space. Especially part of the motivation for going into these religious communities. They want to be able to go on a public bus and travel alone. and so they adopt headscarves. And these kinds of motivations are linked together through the medium of religion in the environments where there's pressure. Outside of that, there's belief, faith, and other motivations, obviously, but the one that's been problematized by İlknur and myself, actually, it's not exactly that. It's not exactly religion. Thank you very much. So over to you for questions and answers. And if you are not taking any questions, you have 1 minute to make some final remarks, starting with İlknur. Please go ahead. You have only 1 minute. Thank you very much. Only 1 minute. That's very good. How to wrap up in 1 minute? A tertiary victimization language was generated. Did they have a point? Of course they did. If we were to tell you that they weren't right and they didn't have a point, that wouldn't be a humane approach, and we would have disregarded a lot of different aspects. Yes, they did have a point, but this language of victimization gives birth to a state of not becoming an adult, because it's an eternal victimization. Rather than taking responsibility for their actions, they describe and define their actions because they had to, because they had to react to certain people's acts and or actions. And the relations between Islam and the marketplace and consumerism with headscarf, there seems to be a ban on a desire for power, for money. They give the impression that they had to grow stronger in the face of opposition in the environment, and they create a legitimate perception describing modernization as a traumatic experience. And this victimization narrative does not allow them to grow up, to become adults. If they were to give up on that approach, I think they can get rid of that. And we can criticize that, obviously, but it creates a comfort zone of being able to accuse or put the blame on everybody else. If they give up on this language of victimization and take up responsibility for their actions, and there are women who do so, I think they'll become more realistic. And after 2000s, yes, they've reiterated this as well. They do not view this these developments as a withdrawal of Islamism, but one author I looked into was asking the following question. The communities, Islamist communities, are not centering on religious solidarity, but rather centering on having building relations with the economy and drawing strength from that. And that's an obvious choice. And that led to individualization and scattering of the pious people. Because they couldn't find a political opportunity, they looked to economic opportunities, and pious people isolated themselves from religious affairs and focused on economic affairs. Rather, it's not a withdrawal, but a transformation, growing stronger in a different sphere. That's my interpretation of their writings. Modern but modest women. The authors I read support this. Modern, yet virtuous, modest. And that fits the enlightened Islamist women image or model. During the first speeches, earlier speeches of Atatürk, the definition of women is not criticized by these authors. Actually, they say that feminists are establishing associations between women and sexuality, and that's why the virtuous women model is being criticized, and we've continued this virtuous model or the modest model. I'm not sure if I was able to answer the question. In fact, this can be translated into "we are the true Republican women." I didn't want to make that sentence, utter that sentence. I wasn't that courageous, but if both Islamists, if you look at it, both Islamists and Kemalists are constructing one another by negating one another. And this reduced the number of intersections and ways to establish relations, and they're right in some of the points they make. I think if is the question more about what if there was no negation? I was looking at the other questions, but we've run out of time in any case. I missed one question in the list, and I want to read this out loud. Thank you very much for the enlightening presentations. Is there any explanation on the side of these authors about the extreme luxury consumption attitudes or tendencies of the Islamist women? For example, the infamous example of the lady buying a diamond for a baby. Right. In the last 20 years, Turkey was not criticized. So they were not criticized as much as the first years of Republic was criticized, and they are concerned about these luxury consumption making Islamism more Protestant and headscarves and modest dressing more Protestant, and they do voice some criticism, but it is a silent criticism. It's not a direct criticism, as Aktaş does with Western concepts, as looking at women as fighters. And they're not directly saying that what's happening right now is wrong, not directly. And the criticism from the secular side is so strict, so well-defined that they find themselves in a position to defend themselves. I'm looking at other panelists. Do you have any final remarks? Unfortunately, I don't see any questions directed at you. I do have some questions for you, but I don't want to take any more time. Over to you. Let me start, please.
Şimdi filmde hani
I will speak Turkish. I keep saying that there are more heterogeneous representations of certain figures in the film. There are certain stereotypes as well, but Freud says that who is laughing at whom and how, who is generating the comedy. I think that's more like the point of the film. Are we laughing for humoristic reasons, or how laughing is represented in the movie? To better answer the question, we have to take a more intensive look at the aesthetic language of the film, of the movie. Because of the short presentation, I focused on the transformation on the characters, but how this is perceived by the audience, how the intentions of the director is are realized. These aspects can be explored further, and we can test what the comedy serves better through this way, I believe. And more detailed aesthetic analyses can be required, needed. Professor Madera, over to you.
If you want to say anything to complete your presentation. We cannot hear you, sorry.
Just another opportunity to thank you for all the organization of the meeting, or for your ability to gather so many experts about Turkish issues, because it was a pleasure for me to participate in this conference and to be able to attend so many interesting lectures and different points of view. Thank you so much.
We are grateful that you are with us today. Thank you very much for your great, amazing presentation and opening new ways for us. Teşekkür ediyorum panelistlerimize. Ayrıca bizi dinlediğiniz için de teşekkür
A big thank you to all of our panelists, and a big thank you for hearing us, bearing with us. I do apologize to the organizers of the conference for using the time allocated terribly poorly. Thank you very much. Thank you to Professor Ayşe and to all of the panelists. We've heard a lot of interesting presentations and views from the panelists, but we have to move on, carry on, and we'll take a short lunch break now. We will see you back here at 1:30 to discuss body politics and Islam.